The marketplace on station Kepler 442 buzzed with the usual mix of alien voices, mechanical sounds, and the smell of exotic foods from dozens of worlds. Ambassador Zethara walked through the crowded corridors with her usual air of superiority. Her purple skin gleamed under the artificial lights, and her forearms moved gracefully as she examined various goods from different vendors. The Velkari were known throughout the galaxy as one of the most advanced species. They had mastered faster-than-light travel, when most other races were still figuring out basic agriculture. Their technology was impressive, their cities beautiful, and their sense of superiority well-established. Zethara had been appointed as the Velkari representative to the Galactic Council, a position she wore like a badge of honor. As she moved through the market, lesser species stepped aside to make way for her. The small furry Yithak merchants bowed their heads respectfully. The tall, thin Nexari moved their shopping to different stalls to avoid crowding her path. Even the proud Corvani warriors gave her space, recognizing her status in the galactic hierarchy. Then she saw them. A small group of humans had set up a modest stall selling what appeared to be simple metal tools and basic electronics. Zethara had heard about humans, of course. They were the newest species to join the galactic community, barely 200 years since first contact. They came from a world called Earth, which most educated beings knew was classified as a death world, a planet so dangerous that most species would die within hours of landing there. The humans themselves didn't look particularly impressive. They were smaller than Corvani, weaker looking than the rock-like granids, and certainly not as graceful as her own people. They had only 2 arms, primitive-looking skin without any natural armor, and their technology seemed decades behind the galactic standard. What annoyed Zethara most was how the other aliens seemed drawn to the human stall. They were asking questions about the simple tools, examining the basic electronics with interest, and actually buying things. It was embarrassing to watch advanced species lower themselves to trade with such primitives. But what happened next made her blood boil with anger. A small human child, probably no more than 6 or 7 years old by their development standards, had wandered away from the stall. The little creature was running between the legs of various aliens, laughing and playing some sort of game. It was completely undisciplined, making noise, and disrupting the dignified atmosphere of the marketplace. The child ran directly into Zethara's path. "Move aside, little beast," she said in the common galactic language, expecting the child to understand and obey like any properly raised young being would. But the human child just looked up at her with bright, curious eyes and said something in their primitive language. Then, to Zethara's absolute horror, the child reached out with its tiny hands and touched her ceremonial robes. The fabric was worth more than most beings made in a year. It was woven from the silk of rare crystal spiders found only on the Velkari homeworld. The touch of this dirty, primitive creature left small fingerprints on the precious material. Zethara's temper, already strained by the indignity of sharing space with such inferior beings, finally snapped. Without thinking, she backhanded the child across the face. The slap echoed through the marketplace like a gunshot. The small human was thrown backward by the force of the blow, landing hard on the metal floor several feet away. The child's cry of pain and surprise cut through all other sounds in the area. For a moment, everything was perfectly silent. Then the adult humans at the stall looked up. The father, a man with kind eyes and calloused hands, saw his child on the ground, a bright red mark already forming on the small face. The mother, who had been organizing their simple goods, dropped everything and ran toward her injured offspring. Zethara felt a moment of satisfaction. Perhaps now these primitives would learn to control their young properly. She began to walk away, already dismissing the incident from her mind. But something in the air had changed. The other aliens in the marketplace were backing away, not from her, but from the humans. The Yithak merchants were closing their stalls and hurrying away. The Nexari were gathering their belongings with unusual speed. Even the Corvani warriors, who feared nothing in normal combat, were moving toward the exits. One of the older granids, his rock-like features showing unusual concern, approached Zethara. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "you should leave. You should leave now." "I beg your pardon?" Zethara replied, still feeling justified in her actions. "I will not be driven away by the parents of an undisciplined child." The granid's stone face somehow managed to show pity. You don't understand. You struck a human young one. Their young are, he struggled to find the right words. They are sacred to them. And humans are not like other species. They're from a death world. But Zethara wasn't listening. She was watching the human parents as they knelt beside their child. The mother was checking for serious injuries while speaking in soft, comforting tones. The father was looking at the red mark on his child's face. And something was happening in his eyes that made even Zethara's superior Velkari confidence waver slightly. It wasn't anger she saw there. Anger she could understand and dismiss. This was something colder, more calculating and infinitely more dangerous. The father stood up slowly. He said something to his mate in their primitive language. She nodded and picked up the child, who was still crying but seemed more frightened than seriously hurt. Then the father looked directly at Zethara. "I know who you are," he said in perfect galactic standard, his voice calm and controlled. "Ambassador Zethara of the Velkari delegation. Diplomatic immunity. Protected by 17 different galactic treaties." The way he said it made it sound less like a protection and more like a challenge. "I know exactly who you are," he repeated. "And now you know who we are." The marketplace was almost empty now. Even the security guards, members of various species trained to handle disputes, had found reasons to be elsewhere. Zethara realized she was essentially alone with the humans. The father picked up a small device from his stall and spoke into it briefly. Within minutes, more humans began arriving. Not officials or guards, but ordinary-looking humans. A woman who looked like a teacher. A man who might have been an engineer. Teenagers who could have been students. Elderly humans who moved with surprising strength. None of them appeared threatening individually. But together they formed something that made every instinct Zethara had developed over centuries scream warnings. "You have diplomatic immunity," the father said again, "for now." Then they turned and left, taking their child with them. The other humans followed silently. Zethara stood alone in the empty marketplace, suddenly understanding why the other species had fled. She had just struck a human child, and she was beginning to realize that might have been the biggest mistake of her very long life. The human medical bay on Station Kepler 442 was small but efficient. Dr. Sarah Chen finished examining little Emma Morrison for the third time, her experienced hands gentle as she checked the child's reflexes and responses. The red mark on Emma's cheek was already beginning to fade, but the emotional impact was clearly still there. "She's going to be fine physically," Dr. Chen told the parents. "No concussion, no permanent damage. The bruising will be gone in a few days." John Morrison, Emma's father, nodded but didn't look relieved. His wife Maria held their daughter close, whispering comfort in both English and Spanish. Emma had stopped crying but kept touching her cheek where the alien had struck her. "Daddy," Emma said quietly, "why did the purple lady hit me?" "I was just trying to say hello." John's jaw tightened. "Some people forget how to be kind, sweetheart. But that's not your fault." Dr. Chen watched the family with growing concern. She had known John Morrison for 15 years, ever since the human colony ship had arrived at this sector of space. She had seen him calm in crises, patient with difficult people, and always the voice of reason in human community meetings. But something was different now. There was a stillness about him that reminded her of the predators back on Earth just before they struck. "John," she said carefully, "what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about diplomatic immunity," John replied, "and how it protects someone who hits a 6-year-old child." "The Galactic Council will handle this through proper channels," Dr. Chen said. Though her voice lacked conviction, John looked at her with eyes that seemed much older than his 45 years. "Sarah, you've been treating humans for 15 years. In all that time, how many formal complaints against other species have been successfully processed by the Galactic Council?" Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. "None," she admitted. "And how many times have other species been held accountable for actions against humans?" "None." "Right." John stood up and kissed his daughter's forehead. "Maria, can you take Emma home? I have some calls to make." Maria Morrison looked at her husband with understanding and worry in equal measure. She had been married to John for 12 years. She knew what that tone meant. "John, please be careful." "Always am," he replied. But they both knew he was lying. After his family left, John walked to the communications center in the human quarter of the station. The area was buzzing with activity that wouldn't have been noticeable to other species, but Dr. Chen recognized the signs. Humans were organizing. The thing that other species never seemed to understand about humans was how quickly they could mobilize when one of their own was threatened. It wasn't official military action. Humans had been very careful not to create alarm among their galactic neighbors by displaying their full military capabilities. This was something more organic, more instinctive. It was the same response that had allowed their ancestors to survive on a planet where almost everything was trying to kill them. John activated the quantum communicator and began making calls, first to the human settlements on nearby worlds, then to the human trading ships currently in the sector, finally, to some very specific individuals whose official jobs didn't quite match their actual skill sets. Dr. Chen watched from the medical bay as more humans began arriving at the station. They came on scheduled transports on trading vessels and on ships that didn't appear on any official registries. To casual observers, it might have looked like a coincidence, humans traveling for business, visiting family, or pursuing various personal interests. But Dr. Chen knew better. She had grown up on Earth, in the Australian outback where her grandfather had taught her to recognize the signs when the community was preparing to deal with a threat. The first sign was the children. Human children on the station were quietly moved to more secure areas, their movements coordinated by parents who seemed to be following an unspoken plan. The second sign was the way conversations stopped when non-humans passed by. Humans were naturally social creatures, but now they were displaying the kind of operational security that spoke to military training. The third sign was the equipment. Nothing that looked like weapons, of course, just tools, spare parts, and electronic components that happened to be exactly what someone would need to perform very specific technical operations. By the end of the first day after the incident, the human population on the station had nearly tripled. Commander Takol of Station Security noticed the increase in human traffic and decided to investigate. The Nexari officer was experienced in maintaining order among dozens of different species and understood the importance of monitoring unusual patterns. He found John Morrison in the Human Community Center, apparently organizing a cultural celebration. "Mr. Morrison," Takol said politely, "I couldn't help but notice the increase in human visitors to the station. Is there some special occasion we should be aware of?" John looked up from a tablet where he appeared to be coordinating food deliveries. "Just a gathering, Commander. Humans don't get together very often out here in space. When we do, we like to make it count." "I see. And this gathering is related to yesterday's unfortunate incident with Ambassador Zethara." "What incident?" John's expression was perfectly innocent. Takol studied the human carefully. In his 20 years of security work, he had developed a good sense for when beings were lying. But humans were notoriously difficult to read, and John Morrison was giving him no obvious tells. "The incident where your daughter was struck by the ambassador." "Oh, that?" John's voice was casual, almost dismissive. "Kids get bumped around sometimes. These things happen." But Takol noticed that every human in the area had stopped what they were doing and was listening to the conversation. Their body language was alert, ready, like soldiers awaiting orders. "Of course," Takol said carefully. "I'm sure the ambassador didn't mean any harm." "I'm sure she didn't," John agreed. "Though intention and consequence aren't always the same thing, are they?" Takol left the community center feeling deeply unsettled. He had dealt with angry families before, seen grief turn to rage, watched various species seek justice or revenge for wrongs committed against their loved ones. But this was different. The humans weren't angry. They weren't grieving. They weren't seeking justice through official channels. They were planning. That night, Dr. Chen was working late in the medical bay when John Morrison stopped by. He looked tired but determined, like a man who had just finished organizing something complex. "How's Emma?" she asked. "Better. She's drawing pictures of all the nice aliens she's met. She's already forgotten about the mean one. But you haven't." John was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, do you know why they call Earth a death world? Because of the dangerous wildlife, extreme weather, and toxic environments. That's part of it. But the real reason is that Earth doesn't just try to kill you with predators and disasters. It makes you into something that can survive predators and disasters. It makes you into something that can become the most dangerous thing on the planet when necessary." Dr. Chen felt a chill. "John, what are you planning?" "Nothing illegal. Nothing that violates any galactic laws or treaties. John's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. But Ambassador Zathara is about to learn something very important about humans. What's that? Diplomatic immunity protects you from governments. It doesn't protect you from individuals who no longer have anything to lose. John left the medical bay, and Dr. Chen realized that somewhere in the past 24 hours, the situation had moved beyond official protests or formal complaints. The humans had decided to handle this themselves, and that meant Ambassador Zathara was in more danger than she could possibly imagine. Ambassador Zathara woke in her luxury quarters aboard the Velkari diplomatic vessel, feeling unusually anxious. 3 days had passed since the incident with the human child, and she had expected the matter to fade into insignificance like most interactions with primitive species. Instead, things had become increasingly uncomfortable. It started with small things. The food delivery service that usually brought her meals from the finest restaurants on the station had experienced a series of technical difficulties. The maintenance crew that serviced her ship had discovered urgent issues that required them to focus on other vessels. Even the diplomatic courier service had encountered scheduling conflicts that delayed her communications with the Velkari homeworld. Each problem, taken individually, was minor and easily explained, but together, they formed a pattern that made Zathara's highly developed Velkari paranoia begin to sound warning bells. She decided to visit the station's administrative offices to file a formal complaint about the declining service quality. The corridors of Station Kepler 442 seemed different now. Where once she had moved through crowds that parted respectfully before her, now she found herself walking through areas that were strangely empty. The few beings she encountered were polite enough, but their greetings seemed forced and they hurried away quickly. Even more disturbing were the humans. They weren't avoiding her like the other species. Instead, they seemed to be everywhere she went. A human technician working on a wall panel when she passed, a human janitor cleaning floors along her route, a human merchant organizing inventory at nearby stalls. None of them looked at her directly. None of them spoke to her. But Zathara had the growing sensation that she was being watched, tracked, and catalogued with an attention to detail that would have impressed Velkari intelligence operatives. At the administrative offices, she found Chief Administrator Vexilon, a competent Corvani who had run the station efficiently for 12 years. Ambassador, Vexilon greeted her with less enthusiasm than usual. "How can I assist you today? I wish to file a formal complaint about the deteriorating service standards on this station," Zathara announced. "As a diplomatic representative, I expect certain courtesies to be maintained." Vexilon's expression became carefully neutral. "I see. Could you be more specific about these service issues?" Zathara listed her complaints, from the delayed food deliveries to the maintenance problems. Vexilon listened politely and took notes, but his responses were strangely unhelpful. "I'm afraid the food service contractors are independent businesses. The station administration can't force them to prioritize specific customers. The maintenance crews are union workers with their own scheduling protocols. Courier services operate under galactic commercial regulations that are outside our jurisdiction." Everything he said was technically correct, but Zathara could tell he was deliberately avoiding any real assistance. "Administrator, I hope you understand that the Velkari Empire values efficient station operations. We would hate to see funding for this facility reconsidered due to management issues." The threat was subtle but clear. Velkari financial support was significant enough to impact the station's budget. Vexilon's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Of course, Ambassador. Though I should mention that we've recently received some very generous infrastructure investment offers from human trading consortiums. It seems they're quite interested in expanding their presence in this sector." Zathara felt a chill. Human economic power was one of the few things about the primitive species that even the Velkari had learned to respect. Their ability to generate wealth and distribute resources was remarkably sophisticated for such a young civilization. "I wasn't aware humans had such extensive commercial interests in this area," she said carefully. "Oh yes, in fact they've been particularly active in the past few days. Quite energetic in pursuing new opportunities." The way he emphasized the words made Zathara suspicious that they were discussing more than just business ventures. She left, the administrative offices feeling more unsettled than before. The sensation of being watched had intensified, and she was beginning to recognize faces among the humans she encountered. The same technician appeared to be working on projects throughout the station. The same merchant seemed to be conducting business in multiple locations. It was possible, she told herself, that humans simply looked similar to her eyes. Most primitive species appeared almost identical until you learned to distinguish their minor variations. But Velkari survival instincts, honed over millions of years of evolution, were telling her something was wrong. That evening, she decided to test her suspicions. Instead of returning directly to her ship, she took a circuitous route through the station's recreational areas. She stopped at shops, visited public spaces, and even spent time in the observation lounges watching ships arrive and depart. Everywhere she went, humans were present, not following her obviously, not watching her directly, but always there, always in position to observe her movements, always within communication range of other humans. By the time she finally reached her ship, Zethara was convinced she was under surveillance. The question was, what were they planning to do about it? Her ship's computer system provided some answers. A diagnostic scan revealed that her communications had been monitored. Not intercepted. That would have been a violation of diplomatic protocols, but monitored in ways that revealed exactly whom she was contacting and when. Her movement patterns had been tracked through the station's public security systems. Again, nothing illegal. The footage was available to any being with proper authorization, but someone had clearly been studying her habits and routines. Most concerning of all, her ship's supply deliveries had been carefully documented. Someone knew exactly what resources she had available, how long they would last, and when she would be forced to resupply. Zethara was a trained diplomat, but she was also a Velkari noble with access to some of the galaxy's best security education. She recognized the signs of a professional operation. The humans were building a detailed intelligence file on her. They knew her capabilities, her resources, her contacts, and her weaknesses. They were preparing for something. She activated her ship's emergency communication system and sent a priority message to the Velkari embassy on the nearest major world. The message was simple: request immediate diplomatic extraction due to security concerns. The response came back within 6 hours. Request denied. No credible threats identified. Maintain current assignment. Zethara stared at the message in disbelief. Her own government was abandoning her. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting permission to board her vessel. The security system identified the visitor as John Morrison, the father of the human child she had struck. For a moment, she considered refusing the request. But diplomatic protocols required her to receive visitors during official hours, and Morrison had followed proper procedures. She activated the airlock and waited. John Morrison entered her ship with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He was dressed in simple civilian clothes, but he moved like someone with military training. "Ambassador," he said politely, "thank you for agreeing to see me." "What do you want?" Zethara demanded. "To talk, to give you a chance to understand your situation." "My situation?" John looked around the luxurious interior of her diplomatic vessel with mild interest. "You're alone. Your government has declined to extract you. Your diplomatic immunity protects you from official legal action, but it doesn't protect you from the consequences of your choices." "Are you threatening me?" "No, I'm explaining reality." John's voice remained calm and reasonable. "You struck my daughter. In human culture, that creates certain obligations. Your primitive cultural obligations mean nothing to a civilized being." John nodded as if he had expected that response. "You know what's interesting about primitive cultures? They tend to have very direct solutions to problems." He turned to leave, then paused at the airlock. "By the way, you might want to check your ship's navigation system. I noticed some of the humans working on the dock are systems specialists. They're very good at their jobs." After he left, Zethara ran a full diagnostic on her ship's systems. Her navigation computer had been subtly modified. Not damaged. That would have been detectable. but altered in ways that would cause random malfunctions if she tried to leave the station. She was trapped, and somewhere on the station, the humans were finishing their preparations. Ambassador Zethara spent the next 2 days trying to contact anyone who might help her escape the station. Her calls to Velkhari military commanders were politely deflected. Her attempts to reach other diplomatic missions resulted in vague promises of looking into the matter. Even her personal contacts among the galaxy's elite seemed suddenly unavailable. It was becoming clear that the humans had done more than just sabotage her ship. They had used their growing economic and political influence to isolate her completely. On the 3rd day, her food replicator stopped working. The malfunction was subtle. The device still powered on and appeared to function normally, but every meal it produced was inedible. The proteins were overcooked, the vegetables were mushy, and everything tasted of metal and chemicals. Zethara tried to order food from the station's restaurants, but discovered that all the delivery services were experiencing technical difficulties when it came to her ship. She could pick up food in person, but that would require leaving the relative safety of her vessel. She finally had no choice but to venture into the station's commercial district. The moment she left her ship, she could feel human eyes tracking her movement. They weren't hiding their surveillance anymore. In fact, they seemed to want her to know she was being watched. A human woman pushing a cleaning cart smiled pleasantly as Zethara passed. A human man reading a datapad at a nearby cafe looked up and nodded politely. A group of human teenagers lounging in a corridor fell silent as she approached, then resumed their conversation in their primitive language once she had passed. But Zethara's translator picked up enough to understand they were discussing her ship, her schedule, and her growing desperation. At the first restaurant she tried, the Nexari owner was apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Ambassador, but we're not accepting new orders today. Perhaps you could try the Corvani establishment on level 7. The Corvani establishment directed her to a Yithak food stall. The Yithak vendor suggested she visit the human-run cafeteria. After 2 hours of being politely redirected from one establishment to another, Zethara found herself standing outside the only place on the station willing to serve her. A small human restaurant called Earth's Kitchen. The irony was not lost on her. Inside, she found a modest establishment with simple furnishings and the strange, chaotic decorations that humans seem to favor. The owner, a middle-aged human woman with graying hair, greeted her with professional courtesy. "Welcome to Earth's Kitchen. I'm Janet. What can I get for you today?" "I require a meal suitable for Velkhari physiology," Zethara said stiffly. "Of course. We have a full xenobiology menu. Dr. Chen helped us develop it." Janet handed her a tablet with food options. "Everything's guaranteed safe for your species." The prices were reasonable, the options looked acceptable, and Janet's manner was perfectly professional. But as Zethara waited for her food, she noticed the other customers. They were all human. Every single person in the restaurant was human, and they were all watching her with the kind of polite interest that predators showed when studying prey. "Excuse me," said a voice behind her. Zethara turned to find an elderly human man with kind eyes and calloused hands. "You're Ambassador Zethara, aren't you?" "Yes, I'm Henry Morrison. I'm Emma's grandfather." Zethara felt her blood freeze. The child's grandfather. She was surrounded by humans, and she had just been approached by a member of the victim's family. "I wanted to meet you," Henry continued conversationally, "to understand what kind of person strikes a 6-year-old child." Other humans in the restaurant had stopped pretending to eat and were now openly listening to the conversation. "It was an accident," Zethara said quickly. "A misunderstanding." Henry nodded thoughtfully. "I've had a lot of misunderstandings in my life. 87 years of them. But I've never accidentally hit a child." "Your granddaughter was being disruptive. She was being 6 years old." Henry's voice remained gentle, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Do you have children, Ambassador?" "The Velkhari do not burden themselves with offspring until reaching advanced maturity." "I see. So you wouldn't understand how it feels to see your grandchild come home with a handprint bruised into her face." Zethara looked around the restaurant desperately. Every human present was now staring at her with expressions that made her survival instincts scream warnings. "I have diplomatic immunity," she said, hating how weak her voice sounded. "Yes," Henry agreed. "You certainly do. Janet brought Zethara's food to the table. It looked normal, smelled appropriate, and seemed perfectly safe. But as she ate, Zethara became aware that she was participating in something that felt distinctly like a last meal. "You know," Henry said, settling into the chair across from her, "humans have a saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Do you know what that means?" Zethara shook her head. "It means that when you hurt one of our children, you don't just anger their parents. You anger their entire community, their extended family, their neighbors, their teachers, everyone who cares about them." Henry gestured around the restaurant. "These people all know Emma. They've watched her grow up. They've helped celebrate her birthdays, cheered at her school performances, worried when she was sick." More humans were entering the restaurant, not crowding, not threatening, just filling the space with their presence. "The thing about village-raised children," Henry continued, "is that they belong to everyone, and everyone protects what belongs to them." "What do you want?" Zethara whispered. "Justice. I have immunity. You cannot touch me legally." Henry smiled, and for the first time, Zethara saw something in his expression that reminded her why Earth was classified as a death world. "Ambassador, I think you misunderstand something about humans. We didn't become the dominant species on Earth by following rules. We became dominant by making rules that others had to follow." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you know how humans traditionally dealt with threats to their children?" Zethara was afraid to ask. "We eliminated them, permanently, completely, without mercy or hesitation." "But galactic law doesn't apply to accidents," Henry finished. "And humans are very creative when it comes to arranging accidents." As if summoned by his words, more humans began entering the restaurant. Some she recognized from the past few days: the technician, the janitor, the merchant. Others were new faces, but they all had the same look: calm, determined, and absolutely lethal. "You see," Henry explained, "the beautiful thing about diplomatic immunity is that it only protects you from governments. It doesn't protect you from individuals acting on their own initiative." A younger human man approached the table. Zethara recognized him as one of the ship mechanics who worked on the docking bays. "Grandfather Henry," the man said respectfully, "we've finished the preparations you requested." "Thank you, Marcus. Is everything ready?" "Yes, sir. The route is clear, the equipment is in place, and the cleanup crew is standing by." Zethara's translator was having difficulty with some of their words, but the general meaning was terrifyingly clear. "Now," Henry said, turning back to her, "we're going to give you a choice. You can come with us voluntarily, or we can make this difficult. But either way, you're coming with us." "Where?" "To face justice." Zethara looked around the restaurant one more time. Every human present was watching her with the patient, implacable expression of beings who had already decided her fate. She thought about running, but the humans between her and the exits weren't even trying to look non-threatening anymore. She thought about calling for help, but her communications device had mysteriously stopped working. She thought about her diplomatic immunity, but realized it was just a piece of paper that meant nothing to people who no longer cared about pieces of paper. "What kind of justice?" she asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Henry stood up slowly, his elderly frame moving with surprising strength. The kind that ensures no one ever hits another human child and thinks they can walk away unpunished. Two humans moved to stand behind her chair, not touching her, not threatening her directly, but making it clear that her options had just become very limited. "Shall we go?" Henry asked politely. Ambassador Zethara, representative of one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, realized she was about to discover why the rest of the galaxy was secretly terrified of the primitives from the death world called Earth. The humans led Zethara through corridors she had never seen before. Hidden maintenance passages, service tunnels, and emergency routes that formed a shadow network throughout the station. As they walked, she began to understand how the humans had been able to monitor her so effectively. They had turned the station's own infrastructure into a surveillance system. "These passages," she said to Henry Morrison, who walked beside her with the casual confidence of someone taking a pleasant stroll. "How do you know about them?" "Humans built half this station," Henry replied. "When you construct something, you tend to understand how it works. Every shortcut, every hidden space, every way in and out." They passed other humans along the way, maintenance workers who nodded respectfully to Henry. security technicians who stepped aside to let the group pass, even what appeared to be ordinary civilians who somehow knew exactly where to be and when. "How many of you are there?" Zathara asked. "On the station, about 300 permanent residents plus maybe 200 visitors who arrived in the past week." "Visitors?" "Family members, old friends, people who heard that someone had hurt a human child and decided they needed to be somewhere else for a while." The implications hit Zathara like a physical blow. "You planned this. All of it." "Not exactly planned," Henry corrected. "Humans don't usually plan revenge. We just respond, and our responses tend to be very thorough." They emerged from the maintenance tunnels into a section of the station that Zathara didn't recognize. The corridor was older, more utilitarian, with none of the decorative elements found in the diplomatic and commercial areas. This was clearly a working part of the station, where the real business of keeping a space habitat functional took place. "Where are we?" she asked. "Industrial Section 7, said Marcus, the young mechanic. "Closed for renovation. Very private." They entered a large chamber that looked like it had once been a cargo bay. The space was empty except for a single chair placed in the center, surrounded by work lights that cast harsh shadows against the metal walls. But what made Zathara's blood freeze was not the furniture. It was the humans. They filled the chamber, dozens of them, maybe more than 100, men and women of all ages, from teenagers to elderly individuals like Henry. Some wore work clothes, others casual civilian attire. A few had the bearing of former military personnel. None of them were talking. They simply stood in orderly rows, watching as she was escorted to the chair in the center of the room. "Sit down, please," Henry said politely. Zathara sat, because the alternative seemed to be falling down from shock. "Now," Henry continued, "before we proceed, I want you to understand something important. Every person in this room is here by choice. No one ordered them to come. No one threatened them or bribed them. They're here because they believe that what you did was wrong, and that someone needs to answer for it." He gestured to the assembled humans. "These are Emma's teachers, her neighbors, her friends' parents, the people who've watched her grow up, the ones who help her when she falls down, celebrate when she succeeds, and worry about her when she's out of their sight." Zathara looked around the room and realized she was seeing something that no other galactic species possessed: a community response system that could mobilize hundreds of individuals without formal organization or official authority. "What you're going to do to me won't be legal," she said, trying to maintain some semblance of diplomatic authority. "That depends on how you define legal," said a new voice. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. She was older, with gray hair and the kind of calm competence that spoke of decades of professional experience. "I'm Judge Patricia Walsh," the woman said, "retired from the Earth colonial court system, but still authorized to conduct legal proceedings under human law." "Human law has no jurisdiction here," Zathara protested. "Actually, it does," Judge Walsh replied. "Article 15 of the Galactic Cooperation Treaty allows member species to exercise legal jurisdiction over their own citizens and over crimes committed against their citizens, regardless of location." She produced a formal-looking document. "I've been authorized by Earth Central Government to conduct a preliminary hearing regarding assault charges against you." Zathara felt the last of her composure cracking. "This is a farce. You cannot try a Velkari diplomat in a human court." "We're not trying you," Judge Walsh said calmly. "We're determining whether sufficient evidence exists to warrant holding you for formal trial. And if you determine that evidence exists, then you'll be transported to Earth for prosecution under Colonial Criminal Code Section 12, assault against a minor." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Every human present was now staring at Zathara with expressions that made it clear they had already reached their verdict. "The penalty for conviction under Section 12," Judge Walsh continued, "ranges from 10 years imprisonment to execution, depending on the severity of injury and the age of the victim." "Execution?" Zathara's voice came out as a whisper. "Humans take the protection of children very seriously," Henry explained. "On Earth, there are certain crimes that society simply will not tolerate." Judge Walsh opened a recording device. "This preliminary hearing is now in session. Ambassador Zathara of the Velkari Empire, you stand accused of assault against Emma Morrison, a 6-year-old human child. How do you respond to these charges?" I have diplomatic immunity. Noted for the record. However, diplomatic immunity does not apply to crimes against children under human law. Please answer the question. Zethara looked around the room desperately. Every face she saw reflected the same implacable determination. These weren't soldiers following orders or officials enforcing regulations. These were ordinary people who had decided that what she had done was unforgivable. The child was disruptive. She touched my ceremonial robes. So you admit to striking her? It was a minor correction of inappropriate behavior. Judge Walsh made notes on her tablet. The defendant admits to striking a 6-year-old child. For the record, Ambassador, what is the typical Velkhari response when a child behaves inappropriately? We correct them. We teach them proper behavior. By hitting them? By providing appropriate discipline. I see. Judge Walsh turned to the assembled humans. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the defendant's testimony. She admits to striking Emma Morrison and claims it was appropriate discipline. What is your finding? The response was instantaneous and unanimous. Guilty. So noted. Judge Walsh turned back to Zethara. Ambassador, this hearing finds sufficient evidence to warrant prosecution under human law. You will be remanded into custody and transported to Earth for formal trial. You can't do this. Zethara stood up, panic finally breaking through her diplomatic training. I'm a representative of the Velkhari Empire. This will cause a war. Henry Morrison stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. Ambassador, let me explain something about humans that your species seems to have missed. We've been fighting wars for our entire existence. We've fought wars against nature, against each other, against impossible odds. We've learned how to win wars that everyone else thought were unwinnable. He gestured to the humans around them. Do you see soldiers here? Do you see weapons? Do you see a military operation? Zethara looked around and realized that she didn't. What she saw was worse. She saw a civilian population that had organized itself with military precision without any formal command structure. What you see here, Henry continued, is what happens when you threaten something that humans consider sacred. You don't get to face our military. You don't get the protection of our laws or the mercy of our courts. He smiled, and the expression was absolutely terrifying. You get to face us. Two humans moved forward, a man and woman who carried themselves like former military personnel. They weren't rough, but they made it clear that resistance would be futile. Ambassador Zethara, Judge Walsh said formally, you are under arrest. As they led her away, Zethara heard Henry Morrison speaking to someone behind her. Contact John, tell him we're ready for Phase 2. What's Phase 2? The other person asked. We deliver her to the council. The last thing Zethara heard before they placed her in what appeared to be a modified cargo container was Henry's voice, calm and matter of fact. It's time the galaxy learned what happens when you hurt a human child. The transport to the Galactic Council chambers took 18 hours. Zethara spent the journey in what the humans politely called protective custody, a modified cargo container that had been converted into a holding cell. It was clean, temperature-controlled, and provided with all necessary amenities. By galactic standards of prisoner transport, it was actually quite humane. But Zethara understood that the courtesy was not kindness. It was a demonstration of human civilization. They were proving that they could be both ruthless and moral, both primitive and sophisticated. When the ship docked at Council Station Alpha, she expected to be transferred to official custody. Instead, she found herself being escorted by the same group of humans who had captured her. This is illegal, she protested to John Morrison, who had apparently taken charge of the operation. You cannot bring a prisoner before the Galactic Council without going through proper channels. Actually, we can, John replied, consulting a tablet. Article 7 of the Council Charter allows any member species to present evidence of crimes against their citizens directly to the full assembly. We're exercising that right. You're presenting me as evidence, among other things. The corridors of Council Station Alpha were busier than Station Kepler 442, filled with beings from hundreds of species conducting the galaxy's official business. But as the human group moved through the crowds, Zethara noticed the same phenomenon she had observed before. Other species moved aside, conversation stopped, and a bubble of nervous space formed around them. Word was spreading that the humans were here, and they had brought something with them. The council chamber was a massive amphitheater designed to accommodate representatives from species with wildly different physiological requirements. Atmospheric zones could be adjusted for different breathing needs. Gravity fields could be modified for species from various worlds, and translation systems could handle thousands of languages simultaneously. When the humans entered, Zethara could see the immediate reaction among the assembled delegates. The Corvani representatives straightened to attention. The Nixari began rapid consultations with their advisors. Even the proudly independent Granids seemed to be taking a sudden interest in the proceedings. John Morrison approached the central speaking platform with the confidence of someone who had addressed hostile audiences before. Behind him, the other humans arranged themselves in neat rows, still maintaining the perfect discipline that had characterized their entire operation. "Honored delegates," John began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic system. "I am John Morrison, representing the human colony of Kepler 442. I come before you today to present evidence of a crime committed against a human child and to demonstrate why such crimes cannot be tolerated." The council speaker, an elderly Yithak named Veltar, who had presided over thousands of disputes during his long career, looked puzzled. "Mr. Morrison, while we appreciate your concern for justice, the proper procedure for criminal complaints is to file with the appropriate legal authorities. The council does not typically hear individual cases." "With respect, Speaker Veltar, this is not an individual case. This is a demonstration of principle." John activated a holographic display that showed the events at Station Kepler 442. The assault on Emma was clearly visible, as was Zethara's dismissive attitude afterward. Ambassador Zethara of the Velkari Empire struck a 6-year-old human child. When confronted about this action, she claimed diplomatic immunity and refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Child welfare was taken seriously by most galactic species, and unprovoked violence against the young was universally condemned. "The human delegation recognizes Ambassador Zethara's diplomatic status," John continued. "However, we also recognize that some actions transcend diplomatic protection." He gestured, and the other humans moved aside to reveal Zethara, restrained but unharmed, standing in the center of their group. "We have conducted our own investigation and trial according to human law. Ambassador Zethara has been found guilty of assault against a minor and sentenced according to the laws of Earth." Speaker Veltar leaned forward. "Mr. Morrison, you cannot simply abduct a diplomatic representative and conduct unauthorized legal proceedings. The Galactic Council cannot recognize such actions." "We understand," John replied calmly. "We're not asking for recognition. We're providing notification." "Notification of what?" John's expression became absolutely cold. "Notification that humans will no longer tolerate violence against our children, regardless of the perpetrator's status or species." He activated another holographic display. This one showed detailed specifications for human military capabilities that had previously been classified. Ship designs, weapon systems, defensive technologies, and strategic assessments that made several delegates gasp in shock. For 200 years, humans have been careful to appear non-threatening to our galactic neighbors. We've limited our military displays, downplayed our technological capabilities, and generally tried to fit into the existing order without causing alarm. The hologram showed comparative analyses between human technology and that of other species. In every category, weapons, shields, speed, maneuverability, human capabilities exceeded galactic standards by significant margins. But our restraint has been misinterpreted as weakness. Some species have begun to believe that humans can be abused without consequence. John looked directly at the Velkari delegation. "This belief is incorrect." The chamber was completely silent now. Even the translation system seemed to be working more quietly. "Ambassador Zethara will be executed according to human law. Her death will serve as a reminder that human children are protected by the full power of human civilization." "This is barbaric," shouted the lead Velkari delegate. "You cannot execute a diplomatic representative." "We can," John replied matter-of-factly. "And we will. The Velkari Empire will not tolerate this insult. We will respond with force." John smiled, and every being in the chamber suddenly understood why Earth was classified as a death world. "We hope you do." He activated a final holographic display. This one showed the current disposition of human military forces throughout the galaxy. Ships that had been thought to be merchant vessels were revealed as warships. Trading stations were shown to be military bases. Colony ships were actually troop transports carrying enough firepower to sterilize entire worlds. Humans have been preparing for this moment for 2 centuries, John explained. Every slight, every insult, every instance of being dismissed as primitives has been carefully documented and planned for. The display zoomed in on the Velkari home system, showing the positions of human vessels that had somehow managed to get remarkably close to critical infrastructure. If the Velkari Empire chooses to escalate this situation, they will discover that their military capabilities have been thoroughly compromised. We know where their ships are, how their weapons work, and what it would take to disable their entire fleet. Speaker Veltar found his voice. Mr. Morrison, are you threatening the stability of galactic civilization? No, Speaker. We're offering to stabilize it. John turned to address the full assembly. For millions of years, this galaxy has operated under the assumption that might makes right. Stronger species dominate weaker ones. Advanced civilizations exploit primitive ones. The powerful abuse the powerless. Humans reject this system, he gestured to Zethara. This individual struck a human child because she believed her status made her untouchable. She was wrong. From this day forward, any being who harms a human child will face the full response of human civilization. Diplomatic status will not protect them. Military power will not save them. Distance will not hide them. We will find them. We will judge them, and we will execute them. The silence in the chamber was absolute. That said, John continued, his tone becoming almost conversational. Humans prefer peace to war. We would rather trade than fight. We would rather build than destroy. The choice is yours. He turned back to Speaker Veltar. The Council has 30 minutes to clear this chamber. After that, Ambassador Zethara will be executed as scheduled. As delegates began to file out in shocked silence, John Morrison stood alone at the speaking platform, watching the most powerful beings in the galaxy flee from a small group of humans from a backwater station. Behind him, Zethara finally understood that she had made a fundamental error in judgment. She had thought humans were just another primitive species. Instead, she had awakened something that the galaxy was not prepared to face, and now it was too late to take it back. The execution was broadcast live throughout the galaxy. Not by human choice, they had actually planned to conduct the proceedings privately. But every major news network, intelligence service, and government monitoring system in known space had focused on Council Station Alpha the moment word spread that humans were about to execute a Velkari diplomat. The method was simple and quick. A single energy discharge that ended Zethara's life in less than a second. By galactic standards of execution, it was remarkably humane, but the message was unmistakable. Within hours, every government in the galaxy was conducting emergency sessions. Military commanders were reviewing their assessments of human capabilities. Diplomatic corps were frantically updating their protocols for dealing with Earth's representatives. Speaker Veltar found himself in the unprecedented position of trying to manage a crisis that could destabilize galactic civilization. The Velkari Empire's response was swift and predictable. Their ambassador to the Council, Kethval, stood before the emergency assembly with righteous fury. The Velkari Empire demands immediate action against the human terrorists who murdered our representative. This unprovoked attack cannot stand. But when he called for support from other species, he found the response disappointingly muted. The Corvani delegate stood slowly. The Corvani Republic acknowledges the Velkari Empire's loss. However, we also acknowledge that Ambassador Zethara committed assault against a human child. By Corvani law, such actions warrant severe punishment. The child was unharmed. Kethval protested. The child was 6 years old, replied the Corvani. The intent to harm was clear. One by one, other delegates offered similar responses. The Nexari spoke of their own strict laws protecting young ones. The Granids noted that their society had similar taboos against violence toward children. Even species that had never particularly cared about human welfare were reluctant to condemn the execution outright. The reason became clear when John Morrison returned to address the assembly. The human delegation appreciates the Council's patience during this difficult time, he said with perfect diplomatic courtesy. We understand that our actions have raised concerns about galactic stability. Speaker Veltar seized the opportunity. Mr. Morrison, The Council must address the precedent you've established. If every species begins taking unilateral action against perceived injustices, civilization itself will collapse. We agree completely, John replied, which is why humans are prepared to offer a solution. He activated another holographic display. This one showed a proposed amendment to the Galactic Peace Accords. The Human Protection Protocol, John announced, a formal addition to galactic law that establishes universal standards for the protection of children, regardless of species. The proposed protocol was comprehensive. It defined minimum standards for child welfare, established procedures for investigating abuse, and created enforcement mechanisms that would apply to all member species. Under this protocol, John explained, any being who harms a child of any species will face prosecution under galactic law. Diplomatic immunity will not apply. Military protection will not be provided. The full resources of galactic civilization will be used to ensure justice. Speaker Veltar studied the proposal carefully. And if the Council adopts this protocol, then humans will have no need to take unilateral action. We will trust galactic institutions to protect our children, just as we will help protect the children of other species. And if the Council rejects this protocol, John's expression became perfectly calm. Then humans will continue to protect our own children by whatever means necessary. The threat was subtle but absolutely clear. Vote for universal child protection laws or face the possibility of human military action every time one of their children was harmed. The Velkari delegates stood again. This is extortion. You cannot force the Council to adopt legislation through threats of violence. John turned to face him directly. Ambassador Kethval, yesterday humans were considered a minor species with limited influence. Today, we have demonstrated capabilities that your intelligence services completely failed to detect. He gestured to the humans standing behind him. These are ordinary civilians, shopkeepers, teachers, mechanics, retirees. They organized themselves, planned and executed a complex operation, and captured a protected diplomatic representative without firing a shot or violating a single galactic law. If ordinary human civilians can accomplish this, what do you think our actual military can do? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. The Velkari Empire is welcome to test our capabilities, John continued, but I should mention that we've had 200 years to study your defensive systems. We know exactly how long it would take to disable your entire fleet. Kethval was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its earlier bravado. How long? 17 minutes. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. 17 minutes to defeat one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces was an impossible claim, unless it wasn't. John activated one final display. This one showed real-time tracking of every Velkari military vessel in space. Their positions, their capabilities, their weaknesses. Everything was laid out in precise detail. We've been watching you for decades, John explained, learning your patterns, studying your technology, preparing for the day when diplomacy would no longer be sufficient. He looked around the chamber at representatives from dozens of species. This applies to all of you. We know where your ships are. We know how your weapons work. We know what it would take to protect ourselves from any threat you might pose. But we don't want war. We want peace. We want to trade, to learn, to build something better together. His voice became softer, almost gentle. All we ask is that you not hurt our children. The vote on the Human Protection Protocol was unanimous. Even the Velkari Empire voted in favor. 2 weeks later, Dr. Sarah Chen was reviewing the implementation reports when John Morrison stopped by her office on station Kepler 442. "How's Emma doing?" she asked. "Better. She's drawing pictures of the nice aliens again. She's already forgotten about the scary one. And you?" John was quiet for a moment. "I've had some interesting conversations with galactic military commanders. It seems there's a lot of interest in human defensive technologies. Are you going to share them? Some of them. The ones that help protect children?" Dr. Chen nodded. She had known John long enough to understand that he was exactly the kind of person you wanted, protecting your community, someone who could be both a caring neighbor and an absolutely ruthless guardian when necessary. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked. John looked out the window at the busy marketplace, where human and alien children played together under the watchful eyes of parents from a dozen different species. "I think we did what was necessary," he replied. And I think the galaxy is a safer place for children because of it. 3 months later, the first case under the Human Protection Protocol was brought before the galactic courts. An Nexari official who had been abusing children in his care was prosecuted by a joint human-Nexari legal team and sentenced to life imprisonment. The Nexari government publicly thanked the humans for their assistance. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson. Humans might be from a death world, but they used their dangerous capabilities to protect the innocent rather than exploit the weak. And every species understood that as long as they treated human children with respect, they had nothing to fear from the Deathworlders. But if they made the mistake that Zethara had made, well, the galaxy had seen what happened to those who hurt human children. It was a mistake no one would make twice. Emma Morrison continued to play in the marketplace, running between the legs of aliens who now made sure to smile and wave when they saw her coming. She was surrounded by a community that would move heaven and earth to protect her, and she was growing up in a galaxy that had learned to value the safety of children above all else. And sometimes, when she laughed and played with her alien friends, her father would watch from nearby and smile, knowing that his little girl would never have to fear the kind of violence that had once seemed acceptable. The Deathworlders had made sure of that.